It was the summer of 2009 at Groom Lake, Nevada. Inside the range most people pretend does not exist. I was 42 years old then. I had been on test programs for over a decade. Nothing about that morning felt special when I parked my truck and walked past the guard shack. The air was still. The sky was clean. The dry lake looked flat and empty, like always. I was assigned to Hangar 4 that week. My job was numbers and limits. I checked sensors. I signed forms. I watched machines behave. That aircraft arrived before sunrise under tarps and armed silence. No markings. No tail number. Just a shape that refused to settle in my eyes. When the ground power came on, I tasted metal at the back of my tongue. Not fear. Not nerves, just metal. The concrete under my boots held a soft tremble, steady and patient. Tools left on a cart had shifted since the night before. No one mentioned it. I wrote the time. I wrote the location. I told myself it was another test. I stepped closer anyway, already knowing this day would not let me go. Before we start the video, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. After that first morning, the day settled into a rhythm that looked normal from the outside. Badge scans. Long walks across concrete that baked by noon. I stayed in the same trailer with the same desk and the same view of the dry lake. The program had a bland name meant to slide off memory. It was listed as an Advanced Flight Systems Evaluation. No one said Area 51. We said the range. We said the site. Words mattered there. My role was narrow by design. I was responsible for validating sensor data before and after ground runs. Pressure, temperature, structural strain, timestamps across systems. I had done this work on stealth platforms and drones. The process was boring on purpose. You trusted boredom. It meant nothing was trying to surprise you. With this aircraft, boredom never arrived. Even when nothing was powered, the numbers did not rest the way they should. Baselines drifted a little overnight. Not enough to trip alarms, but enough to show intent, like a compass needle leaning without a field. The aircraft stayed under cover most of the time. When they rolled it out for inspection, it sat low and plain, shaped like something a careful mind would design to avoid attention. No curves meant to impress. No sharp edges meant to scare. The skin was dull gray, not paint, not bare metal either. Panels met without screws or rivets. You could run a glove along the seams and feel nothing but a change in temperature, cooler on one side than the other. That should not happen in open air. Inside the hangar, space felt tight in ways I could not map. I would measure a distance with a tape and then walk it and feel like I took one step too many. Doors look square, but your shoulder brushed the frame if you were not careful. I blamed fatigue. Long hours do that. Still, I marked it down in my personal notebook, not the official log. I had learned which questions stayed quiet if you wanted to keep working. The team was small. A mix of Air Force, contractors, and a few people whose background was never shared. Everyone was polite. Nobody joked much. We all felt watched, but not by cameras. It was the sense that the program itself noticed you. The test director kept his distance. He spoke clearly and rarely. When he did, people listened, not out of fear, but because he chose words like a man counting steps on thin ice. During the first full power ground run, the metallic taste came back. Stronger this time. It filled my mouth like I had bitten foil. My teeth hummed, not painfully, just aware. The vibration underfoot deepened, slow and even, like a large engine turning far away underground. Instruments showed nothing out of limit. Noise levels were low. Heat was minimal. On paper, it was a perfect run. In my body, it felt like standing too close to a storm you could not see. After shutdown, a pale dust clung to the lower edges of the airframe and the hangar floor beneath it. It looked like fine chalk. Maintenance swept it without comment. I asked where it came from. A crew chief shrugged and said, "The desert gets everywhere." That answer did not fit, but I let it pass. Arguing with the desert is pointless, and arguing with a classified program is worse. At night, I lay in my bunk and replayed the numbers. Timestamps bothered me most. Independent systems disagreed by fractions of a second, then corrected themselves. That happens with bad clocks or loose wiring. We checked both, swapped units, ran control tests with other aircraft. Only this platform showed the drift, always in the same direction, always during power transitions. Patterns like that mean something is pushing back. By the end of the first week, minor health issues started to appear. Headaches, dry noses. One man had a brief nosebleed during a run. Medical logged it as dehydration. We drank more water. No one panicked. Soldiers and engineers are good at ignoring discomfort if the mission keeps moving. Still, I noticed how the birds avoided the airfield on test days. The sky stayed empty longer than usual, even for that place. I began to understand that we were not just testing an aircraft. We were testing how close we could stand to it while it worked. The limits were not written yet. We were part of that process, whether we agreed to it or not. Each evening, as I left the hangar, the vibration faded from my feet, but the taste stayed with me until I slept. That told me the day was not done with me yet. By the second week, the aircraft stopped feeling new and started feeling familiar in the wrong way, like a place you return to in a bad dream. I knew which corner of the hangar stayed colder. I knew which lights flickered during power changes. I knew when the vibration would settle into my boots, even before the system came alive. Familiarity did not bring comfort. It only sharpened what felt off. The program schedule tightened and the briefings grew shorter. Fewer questions were allowed. Fewer names were spoken. It felt like the work was speeding up because someone was afraid of slowing down. I spent most of my time at the instrumentation racks, checking signal paths and logging comparisons between onboard sensors and external range gear. Radar, optical tracking, passive receivers. The range had watched thousands of aircraft over the years. It knew how to see. With this platform, the range struggled. Radar returns were clean one moment and soft the next, like the aircraft was choosing how solid it wanted to be. Optical feeds showed shape without depth, as if the air around it was flattening the image. None of this broke rules. It just bent them gently enough to stay legal. Conversations with coworkers stayed careful. We talked about weather. We talked about schedules. When someone drifted toward the aircraft itself, the talk died fast. One contractor, an older man with years in propulsion, quietly told me the power system was not an engine in the normal sense. He said it behaved more like a condition than a machine. The next day, he was gone. Reassigned, they said. His desk was cleared by lunch. No farewell. No explanation. The message was simple and clean. Security shifted too. Badges were scanned more often. Escorts appeared where they had not been before. Phones were banned outright, even powered down ones. Medical staff increased their presence during runs. They stood off to the side, watching us more than the aircraft. It made me feel like a variable instead of a witness. I kept my own notes tighter and smaller. I memorized what I could. Paper has a way of disappearing in places like that. One afternoon, while running a calibration check with the aircraft completely powered down, I noticed the clocks drift again. Just a little. Enough to catch my eye. No power. No data flow. No reason for change. I ran the test again. Same result. The hangar felt quiet, but the vibration still pressed faintly through the floor, like an echo that never learned to leave. I stood there longer than needed, staring at the fuselage, and had the clear thought that it was not asleep. It was waiting. Health issues became harder to ignore. The headaches lasted longer. Sleep came thin and broken. A young technician fainted during a night shift and woke confused about where he was. Medical wrote it up as stress. Stress fits everything if you want it to. I started noticing the pale dust more often, gathered in places that had been cleaned hours before. It stuck to skin and left a dry smell, like old stone. Washing it off took effort. Late one evening, the test director called a closed meeting with a few of us. No slides. No handouts. He spoke plainly and said the next phase would involve higher energy states and reduced personnel on the floor. He said risks were understood and managed. He did not say safe. I asked about the clock drift and the range inconsistencies. He looked at me for a long moment and said some systems do not like being measured the same way twice. That was the closest thing to an answer I ever got. Walking back to my trailer that night, the desert felt wider than usual. The stars looked sharp and distant. My watch showed the right time, but I checked it twice anyway. I understood then that the program was moving towards something it could not fully predict, and that my role was no longer just to observe, but to stand close enough to record what happened when control slipped. That knowledge settled heavy, and it followed me into the next morning. The next phase began without ceremony. No countdown, no speech about progress. We arrived one morning and found the hangar stripped down to essentials. Fewer carts, fewer tools, fewer people. The aircraft sat centered on the floor, like it had claimed the space for itself. Power cables were already laid out. Medical staff stood farther back than before, quiet and alert. I took my place at the console and felt the familiar weight settle into my chest, the sense that once the switch was thrown, we would all be reacting instead of directing. This phase focused on sustained power, not flight. The goal was to hold the system at levels we had only touched briefly before and watch how it behaved over time. On paper, this was safe. The structure showed no stress. Thermal readings stayed low. The system did not roar or shake. Still, as the power ramped up, the metallic taste hit hard and fast. It coated my mouth and throat, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The vibration grew deeper, not louder, like pressure building inside bone instead of air. Data started to act strange within minutes. Not wild, not broken, just out of step. Timestamps slipped again, more than before. Separate systems that should never agree lined up perfectly for short stretches, then drifted apart. The aircraft was doing something to the environment around it, and our instruments were swimming in that change. I called it out. The range lead acknowledged and told me to keep logging. His voice stayed calm. Too calm. As the run continued, the hangar air changed. It felt thicker, harder to move through. Lights did not dim, but they seemed farther away. I stood up once to stretch and misjudged the distance to the rack, bumping my shoulder harder than expected. Others noticed too. You could see it in the way people slowed their movements, testing space before trusting it. No one said a word, saying it would make it real. The pale dust appeared again, lifting from the floor in slow curls that did not match any airflow. It gathered along the aircraft skin, tracing lines and edges we could not see otherwise. For a moment, the shape looked different. Not larger or smaller, just more complete, like we were seeing the outline of something that extended past the metal. I blinked, and the thought passed, but the image stayed with me. Halfway through the run, a technician near the forward section dropped to one knee. Not collapsed, just lowered himself like his legs had forgotten their job. Medical moved in and guided him out. He was awake and breathing, but his eyes stayed fixed on the aircraft as they led him away. Later, I heard he could not remember the last 10 minutes. That gap never came back. The test director ordered a controlled shutdown earlier than planned. No explanation given. As power stepped down, the vibration eased slowly, like something reluctant to let go. The metallic taste faded last. When it was over, the hangar felt hollow, too quiet, like sound had been taken with it. We stood there longer than usual, waiting for instructions that did not come. Afterward, I reviewed the data alone. Patterns were clearer now. The aircraft was not just responding to commands. It was anticipating them. Small changes appeared in the data before inputs were logged, within margins small enough to deny but consistent enough to track. I checked for feedback loops, prediction algorithms, anything that could explain it. Nothing fit. This was not software guessing ahead. This was the system already there. That evening, security pulled me aside. Not harsh, not threatening. They asked about my logs, my concerns, my health. I answered carefully. They reminded me of my clearance and my obligations. They did not need to say more. I understood the boundary. Still, as I walked back under the dark sky, the vibration lingered faintly in my feet, even miles from the hangar. I knew then the program had crossed a line, and whatever came next would not stay contained to charts and screens. After that sustained run, the program shifted tone. The pace increased, but the explanations thinned out. Schedules changed overnight. Tests were added without full briefings. We were told to trust the process, a phrase that usually means the process no longer trusts you. I stayed because leaving would have raised more questions than staying, and because part of me needed to see where this was going. Walking away felt like abandoning a post while still on watch. The next series of tests pushed toward movement. Not flight yet, but systems that handled balance, orientation, and response. The aircraft rested on its gear, but it behaved like it was already in the air. When we simulated roll inputs, the data showed reaction without delay, faster than control laws allowed. When we fed no input at all, The system still adjusted itself, making tiny corrections as if responding to forces we could not measure. I watched the graphs and felt my stomach tighten. Machines do not correct for things they do not sense. During one afternoon run, I noticed the clocks again. This time the drift was not smooth. It stepped. Small jumps forward, then a pause, then another jump. I checked my own watch against the system time and felt a brief moment of dizziness, like missing a stair in the dark. Others felt it too. A few people rubbed their eyes. One man laughed it off, said he needed coffee. His laugh sounded forced, like he was trying to anchor himself to something normal. The aircraft itself began to feel closer, even when I stayed at my station. Not physically closer, but present in a way that pressed on attention. It was hard to look away from it when it was active. Your eyes drifted back without thinking. The pale dust showed up again, heavier now, collecting in thin lines that curved around the landing gear and along the floor. Maintenance tried different filters. Nothing changed. The dust did not clog intakes or trip sensors. It just appeared, quiet and dry. One night test stands out more than the rest. It was not on the schedule I had seen. Fewer people were called in. Security was tight, silent, and everywhere. We powered the system higher than before, just short of what the flight phase would require. The metallic taste hit so hard my jaw clenched on its own. The vibration climbed into my chest, steady and deep, like standing next to a massive transformer buried underground. The hangar felt longer, stretched, and I had to concentrate to judge distances. Midway through that run, a strange calm settled over the room. Not relief, not confidence, just a flat stillness, like waiting for something you know is coming but cannot name. Data streams stayed clean, almost too clean. Noise dropped away. Variations smoothed out. It was as if the aircraft had found a state it preferred and pulled everything nearby into line with it. That thought scared me more than any alarm would have. Then, one of the external cameras glitched. Just a moment. The image warped, edges bending inward, then snapped back. No error message, no fault flag. The range lead called it a transmission issue. I logged it anyway. A few seconds later, another camera showed the same thing. Different system, same effect. My hands shook as I typed, not from fear, but from the effort of staying steady. When the run ended, shutdown took longer than expected. Not because anything failed, but because the system resisted change. Power levels dropped in steps that did not match commands. The aircraft felt reluctant, like it had been interrupted mid-thought. When everything finally went quiet, I realized my head was pounding and my mouth was dry as dust. Around me, others looked drained, older somehow. That night, lying awake, I understood we were no longer testing performance. We were testing boundaries, and we did not know whose boundaries they were. The aircraft was not just responding to us. It was teaching us how close we could stand. That realization followed me into the next phase, where things stopped being controlled. The twist did not arrive as a shock. It came like a quiet decision made somewhere above us, already signed and dated before we heard about it. We were told the next test would run at night with a reduced crew and an altered power sequence. No full briefing, no open discussion, just a thin packet slid across the table with boxes to initial and a line to sign. The language shifted responsibility downward in careful ways. It said we understood the risks. It said we accepted unknown effects. I hesitated longer than was polite. The test director noticed and met my eyes without pressure, which somehow felt worse. I signed because refusing would not stop the test. It would only remove me from it. That night, the hangar felt different before we even powered up. The air was cooler, heavier, like a storm building without wind. Fewer voices echoed. The aircraft sat in the center under hard lights, uncovered, looking plain and wrong at the same time. As ground power came online, the metallic taste flooded my mouth so fast it made me swallow hard. The vibration followed, deeper than before, pressing through my boots and up my legs until it felt like it lived in my bones. This sequence skipped steps we had always used to ease the system up. Instead, it climbed fast and held. The data streams tightened into clean lines, almost perfect. Timestamps across systems snapped into alignment and stayed there. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Then fear followed close behind. Systems do not behave perfectly unless something is forcing them to. The pale dust lifted from the floor all at once, rising in slow spirals that ignored gravity and airflow. It traced shapes around the aircraft that made no sense, curves where no structure existed. One crew chief near the forward section froze in place, then slowly sat down like his legs had been unplugged. Medical moved in, but before they reached him, he looked up and spoke in short, flat phrases that did not sound like his voice. The words were clear but empty, like labels without meaning. Then he stopped and blinked, confused and scared. At the same time, my screen showed something I had never seen before. The aircraft registered as both active and inactive within the same window. Motion and stillness overlapped. Distance markers flickered. It was not noise. It was not error. It was two states sharing space. I felt a wave of pressure pass through the hangar, not pushing, just present, and for a second the room felt longer than it should be. I steadied myself on the console and kept logging because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. The test director ordered shutdown, his voice tight but controlled. The system did not respond right away. It held its state, calm and unmoving, like it had not heard him. Then, slowly, it stepped down. As power faded, the dust settled back to the floor. The vibration eased. The metallic taste lingered like a memory. No one spoke. We all knew something had crossed from theory into experience. After that night, the program changed in ways that were not written anywhere. People vanished from the roster, not fired, not disciplined, just reassigned into quiet jobs far from the range. Their desks were cleared with care, like they had never been there. I stopped asking where they went. Asking only made you visible. Instead, I focused on my work and on staying useful. Utility is a form of camouflage. Security became less about keeping outsiders away and more about keeping us contained. Movement was tracked. Conversations were monitored without being obvious. Medical checks increased, framed as concern, but felt like inventory. I realized then that the aircraft was not the only thing under test. We were too. How we reacted. How long we stayed functional. How much we noticed before we broke or adapted. I reviewed the data from that night over and over. The overlap in states haunted me. It suggested the aircraft was not just operating within our space, but carrying its own set of rules and letting them bleed outward. A contractor scientist finally spoke plainly to me in a quiet corner. He said the platform was not designed around thrust or lift alone. It was built to manage a boundary, to shape the space it occupied. He did not say where the idea came from. He did not need to. His eyes said enough. The next day, he was gone. Physically, I was not the same. Sleep came in short stretches. Headaches pressed behind my eyes. Sometimes, when I stood up too fast, the room lagged behind me like it needed a moment to catch up. The vibration followed me into waking hours, a faint hum in my teeth when things went quiet. Once, during a power outage in my trailer, I found a smear of pale dust on my toolbox that should have been sealed. I wiped it away and did not tell anyone. The worst part was the sense that the aircraft was aware, not conscious in any human way, but responsive beyond programming. It reacted to proximity, to observation, to intent. During later ground runs, changes appeared in the data before commands were issued, as if the system had learned our habits. That realization settled heavy in my chest. We were no longer leading the test. We were following it. When the notice came that flight testing would begin sooner than planned, I felt a cold calm replace the fear. This was always where it would lead. Ground tests only delay the question of what happens when you let something like that leave the floor. As I walked into the hangar the next morning, the aircraft sat ready, quiet and patient, and I understood that whatever happened next would not stay hidden, no matter how deep the desert was. Flight day arrived wrapped in routine, which was the only way they could make it possible. If they had treated it like a historic moment, too many people would have looked too closely. Instead, it was filed as a limited envelope evaluation with a pilotless platform and a chase aircraft for verification. The morning air was cold and clear. The lake bed stretched, white and empty. I took my place in the control room and set my headset down without putting it on yet. My hands felt steady. My body had already learned what fear felt like here, and this was not it. The aircraft rolled out without sound that matched movement. No engine note you could track, no blast of heat. The vibration arrived anyway, spreading through the room like a low tide coming in. Screens lit up clean and calm. All systems green, too green. The metallic taste crept in slow this time, almost polite, Like a reminder, I swallowed and focused on the data. Trust the numbers. That was my job. Taxi tests went as planned, if planned still meant anything. The aircraft moved with a smoothness that made the ground crew pause more than once. It stopped exactly where it should, lined up on the runway with a precision that felt rehearsed. When the takeoff sequence began, the vibration deepened but did not grow louder. It pressed inward. The pale dust along the runway edges lifted and slid sideways, drawn toward the aircraft in thin sheets. No wind showed on the flags. Liftoff came early. Too early. The aircraft left the ground flatter than expected, like lift was optional, not earned. Load sensors showed almost nothing. Structural stress stayed low, calm, unconcerned. That made my stomach drum. Every aircraft I had worked on paid a price to leave the ground. This one did not. As it climbed, range tracking started to argue with itself. Radar said one thing. Optical tracking said another. Passive systems showed a soft distortion trailing the aircraft, not a wake, not exhaust, just a bending of background that made straight lines look tired. The chase plane pilot called a visual that did not match any of our feeds. He described the aircraft as present, but hard to judge, like depth had been turned down. His voice stayed professional, but there was a strain under it. Then the aircraft turned. Not sharply, not fast, just wrong. It pivoted through a curve that violated the planned envelope, but did not register as a maneuver. Load stayed low. Control stayed smooth. The aircraft behaved as if the air itself had agreed to move with it. I felt the vibrations spike through my chest, and the metallic taste flared so strong it made my eyes water. Around me, people leaned forward without realizing it. Telemetry dropped out without warning. No alarms, no cascading failures, just silence. The clock kept running, seconds stretched. I counted them without meaning to. When the data returned, it came back messy. Timestamps out of order, streams overlapping. The aircraft appeared farther downrange than it could have been. Not by much, enough to matter. Range safety froze, then spoke in a tight voice I had never heard from him before. Abort orders went out. The aircraft did not respond at first. It held its path, steady and calm, like it was finishing a thought. Then it turned back, lining up with the runway from a position it should not have known how to read. The return track crossed a boundary marker, no flight plan included. Someone cursed under their breath. I logged everything. My hands did not shake. My teeth hummed with vibration. On approach, heat shimmer appeared where no heat should have been. It looked cold, like air folding over itself. The aircraft touched down light and smooth and rolled to a stop as if landing was an afterthought. When it came to rest, the vibration faded slowly, reluctant to leave. The metallic taste lingered. No one spoke. The runway crew waited for clearance that took too long to come. As recovery teams approached, I noticed something missing on my screen. A panel marker that had been present on takeoff was gone. No alert, no indication of damage, just absence. When the aircraft was towed back into the hangar and the lights came up, we saw it with our own eyes. A section of skin was gone, cleanly removed. Behind it was not wiring or structure. It was a smooth cavity, dark and cold, with frost forming along its edges and melting upward. That was the moment I understood we had not just flown an aircraft. We had opened something and let it stretch its legs. The response was immediate and inward. Gates locked without alarms. Phones were collected with calm hands. Medical teams moved in fast, not toward the aircraft, but toward us. We were guided into separate rooms and told to sit and wait. No shouting, no panic, just control closing in like a door you do not hear until it clicks. I watched my console go dark and felt a sharp sense of loss, like being cut away from a lifeline. After a while, they brought me into a small briefing room with no windows. Two men I had never met sat across the table. Their badges were plain. Their questions were precise. They asked what I saw, what I felt, what the data showed. I answered honestly, careful with words. When I mentioned the missing panel and the cavity behind it, one of them wrote something down and did not look up again. They slid a statement across the table that described the flight as nominal with minor instrumentation errors. It ended with a place for my signature. I read it twice. My mouth tasted like metal again, even though the aircraft was powered down. I told them I could not sign something that was not true. One of the men nodded like he expected that. He spoke about responsibility, about trust, about the weight of secrecy. He mentioned my family in a way that sounded concerned, not threatening, which made it worse. He said careers do not end with explosions here. They fade. I understood the offer. Silence, in exchange for a soft landing. I did not sign that day. I asked for time. They allowed it, which told me they were confident. Back in my quarters, I lay awake and felt the faint vibration in my teeth, even in the quiet. I thought about the cavity inside the aircraft, smooth and cold, like a space that did not belong to metal. I thought about how easily the system had held its state against commands. Control was an idea we were borrowing, not owning. The next morning, I was told I was being reassigned for health reasons. Stress, fatigue, temporary removal from the program. My access was suspended without drama. My notes were collected. My questions stopped being answered. I watched the hangar from a distance as I packed my things. The aircraft stayed inside, hidden again, patient as ever. I felt a strange pull as I turned away, like leaving something unfinished or something that had noticed me. Before I left the range, a medical officer ran one last check. He asked about headaches, sleep, focus. I answered truthfully. He paused longer than needed over his clipboard and told me I would be fine. His voice lacked certainty. As I drove away across the desert, the vibration finally faded mile by mile until my teeth felt like my own again. Weeks later, in a quiet office far from the range, I was asked again to sign a revised statement. Softer language. More room for interpretation. I signed that one. Not because it was true, but because it was survivable. That was the trade. The program continued without me. I never saw the aircraft again. What stayed was the knowledge of what I had been part of. We had not lost control in a dramatic way. We had lost it politely, step by step, while telling ourselves we were still in charge. That kind of loss is easy to hide and hard to undo. I carried that understanding with me into whatever came next, knowing it would shape the rest of the story, whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. Life after the program did not collapse. That was the strange part. It narrowed. I was placed into a desk role under a different command, far from test ranges and classified hangars. The work was clean and dull. Reports, reviews, safety language without teeth. People were polite but distant, like they had been told how close to stand. No one asked about Groom Lake. No one mentioned the aircraft. It was as if that part of my service had been folded away and sealed. Physically, things settled but never fully returned to normal. The headaches came less often but stayed sharp when they did. Sleep improved, though I still woke some nights with the sense that the room was slightly wrong, like walls had shifted when I was not looking. The metallic taste showed up once in a while, usually around heavy power equipment or during storms. Doctors said it was stress memory. That explanation fit on paper. It did not fit my body. I kept quiet because quiet was safer. Friends from the range stopped calling. A few sent short messages, careful and empty. I understood. Staying connected carried risk. I threw away most of my old notes but kept one small notebook hidden in a box at home. Not evidence, just reminders written in my own hand, so I would not convince myself. It had all been imagination. News stories came and went. Grainy photos, official denials, people arguing online about shapes in the sky. I watched without emotion. What we tested was never meant to be seen clearly. Confusion was part of the shield. The aircraft did not need secrecy to stay hidden. It only needed distance and time. Even now, years later, I measure rooms without thinking. I notice clocks. I pay attention to silence. Whatever we touched out there did not follow me home, but it left marks. Not injuries. Impressions. That was the real aftermath. Not damage, but change. Quiet and lasting. With time, the program faded into the background of my career, but it never left my thinking. Promotions came on schedule. Evaluations stayed solid. I learned how to speak about my service in ways that skipped whole chapters without sounding strange. That skill came easy after a while. Silence becomes routine if you practice it enough. I did run into one former coworker by chance years later at a conference. We exchanged a look that carried more than words. Neither of us mentioned the range or the aircraft. We talked about weather and retirement plans. When we shook hands, I felt a brief vibration, faint and familiar, or maybe I imagined it. I did not ask. Some confirmations are worse than doubts. At home, I kept my life simple. Routine helped. When the power went out during a storm one night, I found a thin layer of pale dust on a shelf in the garage. I wiped it away and said nothing. It did not return. I did not look for it either. Attention has weight. I understood then that the aftermath was not about what happened in that hangar, but about what did not happen afterward. No public failure, no clean ending. Just a program that adjusted and continued. That is how things survive inside large systems. They do not resolve, they absorb. That understanding settled into me and stayed. It shaped how I looked at new technology and confident claims. Some doors, once opened, do not slam shut. They stay slightly ajar, quiet and patient, waiting for the next hand to push. I am careful how I speak about those years, not because of fear, but because words shape how people imagine things. I am not here to sell a story about visitors from the sky or secret wars beyond reach. What I saw did not need those ideas to be unsettling. It stayed grounded in metal, numbers, procedures, and people doing their jobs as ordered. That made it harder to dismiss, not easier. The aircraft was real. The data was real. The effects on people were real. What we could not agree on was what those things meant together. We treated the platform like a machine because that was the language we had. When it behaved like something more than a machine, we adjusted the language instead of the risk. That choice felt small at the time. It was not. Looking back, the most dangerous part was not the technology itself. It was our confidence. We believed that, because we could measure something, we controlled it. When the measurements stopped lining up, we blamed the tools, not the idea that the system might be operating on rules we did not set. Curiosity pushed us forward. Pride kept us there. People still ask what is really tested out in the desert. They want clean answers. Simple truths. I do not have those. I only know that some programs are not about building weapons or aircraft. They are about touching edges, seeing how far reality can bend before it pushes back. Sometimes it does not push. It adapts. I stayed silent for a long time because silence was expected and because nothing good comes from speaking without care. But silence also has a cost. It lets others fill the gap with noise and fantasy. I wanted to leave something quieter behind. A record of how it felt from the inside. Calm, controlled, slowly slipping. If there is one lesson I carry, it is this. Not everything that flies is just an aircraft. Not everything that moves follows the space you think it is in. And not every test ends when the power goes off. Some continue in memory, in habit, and in the way you measure the world long after you leave the range.